IELTS Academic Writing Task 1, 2 pie charts. In this video, we're going to look at a task involving 2 pie charts. Let's do it. We're going to analyse the task, review our method and structure, review the marking criteria, and analyse a sample carefully. Let's start with the task. We'll read the instructions first. It says the first chart shows how energy is used in an Australian household. The second chart shows the greenhouse gas emissions which result from this energy use. Okay, so we've got 2 pie charts clearly. Now the one on the left is showing household energy use, so the proportion of energy that is used in these different areas: heating, water heating, refrigeration, other appliances, lighting, and cooling. So this is proportion of energy use. The other pie chart though is showing something totally different: Australian household greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the gas that is emitted or generated as a result of that electricity use. So here we have the same elements: heating, water heating, refrigeration, appliances, lighting, and cooling, but we're not looking at energy use, we're looking at the gas emissions. So for example, 15% of household gas emissions come from heating. We're going to analyse this more carefully, but let's quickly review the method. Step 1 is to analyse and plan for about 3 minutes. Steps 2 and 3 follow the structure, writing with the criteria in mind. You should spend about 15 minutes writing, and finally 2 minutes to check carefully. So let's analyse these pie charts. So the first thing to think about with pie charts is, are we looking at change over time, 1 year compared to another year, or are we looking at a snapshot, just one point in time? And you'll notice in the instructions up here, we don't have any information about the time. So we could presume that this is current figures or perhaps slightly in the past. And clearly it's a snapshot. We're not looking at 1 year compared to another year, but that might happen in another kind of pie chart task. So 2 snapshots. Then we want to look at the biggest pieces of the pies. In other words, what are the key features in the first pie and the second pie? So we can see here very clearly this big green portion, which is heating. So we can see that almost 50% of energy in Australian households went towards heating. And another big chunk over here went towards water heating. So then I'm sort of interested to see whether these figures are the same over here. Does the element which consumes the most energy, does this also produce the most greenhouse gas emissions? And interestingly, it doesn't. So heating only contributes 15%. But notice the big blue part here, water heating. So water heating generates the most greenhouse gases. The other one, the other big one, 28%, other appliances. And all the rest, lighting, cooling, heating, and refrigeration, much, much lower figures. So also want to look with this type of graph, anytime that you have 2 graphs, you want to see, is there any relationship between the 2? Can we compare or contrast across graphs? So as I mentioned, I noticed here that heating, it consumes the most energy, but it doesn't produce the most greenhouse gases. Water heating, on the other hand, it's quite a high consumer of energy and it does generate the most greenhouse gases. So I'll certainly mention that probably in the overview. In some situations, you'll be looking at pie charts which are showing the exact same thing, but possibly in 2 different countries. You might be looking at energy use in Australia versus the USA, for example. And in that situation, you could compare and contrast more directly. So this one, I'll make reference to the first chart when I'm describing the second chart. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. So when writing, we need to follow the structure, always the same thing: intro, overview, key features, key features. In this particular graph, I'm going to basically divide my key features into first pie and second pie with a little bit of connection between them. And when writing, keep that criteria in mind. Think about task achievement, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy. You're always scored in the same way, regardless of what the task is. So here is a sample. Pause the video now and read through. Now let's go through it together with that criteria on the side. So we'll start with task achievement. Why is this a high scoring task in this criterion? First of all, have I presented a clear overview of main trends, stages, or differences? In this particular case, we're interested in the main differences because there are no trends, there are no stages. So I want to highlight the key differences between the two graphs, and it's down here in my overview paragraph. Overall, it is clear that although heating requires the most energy domestically, that's here, it is not a significant cause of greenhouse emissions. So that's over here. In fact, water heating, here, and appliances account for the majority. So these two together account for most greenhouse gas emissions from a household. So notice in the overview, there's no figures, there's no data. It's very general, but I've described the main differences between the two graphs. The next part in task achievement is elements. Have I mentioned all elements? So what we're talking about here is this stuff. Heating, cooling, lighting. You have to mention them somewhere. You don't need to go into a lot of detail about all of them, but they should be represented in your task. And I've done that. Household heating, water heating, household appliances, refrigeration, lighting, and cooling. They're all accounted for. Onto the key features. Have I presented and highlighted each key feature? So this is in my two little body paragraphs. And this is what I would consider the key features here. Household heating and water heating clearly require the most energy. Notice that quite general statement. Household heating, green, and water heating require the most energy. And then I've given details, accounting for 42% and 32% of overall use respectively. So that is definitely a key feature of this graph, the two big pieces of the pie. Onto the next graph. So here's a little contrast between the two graphs. Even though heating the home uses up the most energy, I'm talking about pie chart 1 here, it accounts for only 15% of the emissions. So now I'm over on this graph. Just slightly more than refrigeration, which is here. It is the heating of water that generates the most greenhouse gases, blue part. Almost a third, followed by appliances, grey, which account for 28% of the average home's pollution. And then I've said the other ones all have very low figures. So those are the key features. I've described them and I've highlighted them, and I've included data, which is my next dot point in task achievement. So the examiner looks for those specific numbers, this kind of stuff, 42%, 32%, 15%, 8%, 15 and 28. You must include that in order to score 7 and up. Last one, have I reported accurately? Yes, I have. So onto coherence and cohesion now, linking and flow. Is it organised logically? Have I used paragraphs? Yes and yes in both cases. The more difficult part of this criterion is the linking devices. You can see the range that I've used here. First line, while, overall, although, in fact, looking in more detail, while, in terms of, however, even though, followed by, as with. So as I'm writing this task, I'm thinking very carefully, how do I make my sentences connect? How do I make sure that they're all holding hands with each other? Lexical resource, vocabulary. Notice the range of vocab used. So we've got domestically, not a significant cause of, account for, majority, consumption, respectively, appliances, household appliances, uses up just slightly more than, generates, followed by, the average home's pollution, figures. All of this language should be fairly familiar to you now that you're quite into your task 1 preparation. And this is a wide range of vocabulary. So as you learn this vocab, as you see it, make sure you're thinking about it while you're writing. Get it into your task 1 in order to score well in lexical resource. The other aspect is precision. So in addition to the range, it needs to be accurate. Your spelling needs to be correct. Grammatical range and accuracy, the final piece of the puzzle. Have I demonstrated a wide range of structures? Let me show you some of them. One, I've used relative clauses like this. The second chart compares the emissions produced. Now this is actually a reduced relative clause. The full relative clause would say the emissions that are produced or the emissions that were produced. So this is reduced relative clause. Another relative clause down here, followed by appliances, which account for 28%. So a more traditional relative clause down here. Comparatives and superlatives are also demonstrated. So heating requires the most energy. Lighting and cooling require less than. Uses up the most energy, just slightly more than, and generates the most greenhouse gases. So expertly used comparatives and superlatives. There's also a cleft sentence. Have a look down here at this one. It is the heating of water that generates the most greenhouse gases. Notice this sentence starts with it rather than heating water generates the most greenhouse gases. This is just demonstrating range of grammar. Complex sentences, we always write with this in mind. Here are some. It is clear that although heating requires the most energy domestically, it is not a significant cause of greenhouse gas emissions. Another one down here with while, and another one starting with even though. Again, in addition to the range of grammar, we need to demonstrate accuracy, precision. So this is a matter of editing and getting feedback on your work, of course. So grammar is accurate, punctuation is accurate as well. So now that you're ready to move on and have a go yourself, make sure you always check your work when you finish and use the checklist to do so. All those points we just looked at, plan with them in your mind, write with them in your mind, and then go through and check, did you do each one? Quick review of the method. Analyze and plan for about 3 minutes. When you're dealing with pie charts, look particularly at things like, is it a snapshot or is it change over time? Are the two pie charts showing the same thing or are they showing two completely different things? And then you want to look at what are the biggest pieces of the pie and is there any relationship between the two pie charts? As you write, follow that structure, keep the criteria fresh in your mind, and finally, check your work. And that's it. Now you're ready to practice working on pie charts.